I came to Oklahoma in the spring of 1925, chasing whispers older than the land itself. Not the oil baron's den, but the silences between the prairie grasses, the places where even the red men feared to speak above a whisper. I sought the lineage of Quetzalcoatl, tracing backward through time to something rougher, more primal. The old settlers spoke in circumlocutions, their eyes sliding toward the horizon whenever I mentioned serpents. They spoke instead of Guthrie, of a doctor there who kept relics best left unmentioned. The asylum rose against the sky like a monument to forgotten sins. Its east wing descended into the earth where ground glass windows peered out at ankle height as if something within needed to watch the soil. Dr. McNeil received me in his office, a small man, clean-shaven, with the precise movements of a scholar who had long ago stopped sleeping through the night. He studied my credentials with the gravity of a man reading a death warrant, his fingers trembling slightly as he set down the letter of introduction. "So you've been studying the Yig legend," he said, not as a question but as a sentencing. He spoke of the snake god of the Central Plains, half anthropomorphic, capricious, ancient, beyond the measuring of tree rings. Not wholly evil, he said, which somehow made it worse. A deity who loved his children with a devotion that bordered on madness, who required only that mankind step carefully around the writhing things. But in autumn, when the harvest moon swelled, Yig grew ravenous. Then the tom-toms would beat ceaselessly in the Wichita country, and medicine men made sounds with rattles that had no name in any human tongue. The doctor spoke of retribution. To kill a serpent was to invite a transformation more terrible than death. Yig did not merely kill, he collected. He turned his victims into spotted snakes, but worse, into things that remembered being human. The doctor's voice dropped to a whisper when he spoke of the ground glass window in the east wing. "I have a specimen there," he said. "A living victim. It does not age. It does not die. I keep it fed and clean, though God knows mercy would be a bullet." He stood, and I saw that his shoulders carried the weight of decades of complicity. We descended into the basement through corridors that smelled of starch and carbolic acid. Our footsteps echoed with a hollow finality. At door B116, the doctor paused, standing on his toes to reach a small observation panel set high in the gray-painted steel. He knocked, not gently, but with a rhythmic pattern, as if warning whatever lay within. A smell issued forth when he slid the panel aside, organic, ancient, the scent of desert crypts and scales shed in darkness. I heard a sound like dry leaves dragged across stone, followed by a hiss that carried the cadence of human breath. I pressed my eye to the aperture. The barred ground glass window admitted only a feeble, uncertain pallor, like light filtered through deep water. At first I saw only straw, matted, yellowed, heaped in corners. Then something moved. It squirmed across the floor with a lateral undulation that made my spine try to twist in sympathy. The creature was of human size, naked, hairless, its back tawny and subtly iridescent with scales that caught the dim light. Around the shoulders, speckled brown markings like those of a rattlesnake. It raised its head, and I saw the skull was flattened, the eyes black beads set in human sockets, regarding me with a persistence that seemed to pierce the door between us. I staggered back, clutching the door handle to keep from falling. The doctor caught my arm with surprising strength for so small a man. "Eddie," he murmured, sliding the panel shut with a decisive click that seemed to seal away not just a room but a different order of reality. "You asked about Yig? That is what remains of Audrey Davis, who killed serpents in the autumn of 1889. She is 40 years in that cell, yet she looks as she did the night they brought her in. The curse preserves, even as it punishes." He guided me away, and I noticed my hands were shaking violently. My scholarly detachment shattered like glass. In his office, with every lamp blazing against the advancing night, Dr. McNeil told me the story. It began with Walker and Audrey Davis, hill folk from Franklin County, Arkansas, who came to the newly opened lands in the spring of 1889. Walker was tall and sandy-haired, raw-boned and strong, with gray eyes that had seen hard labor. Audrey was his opposite, short, dark, with black hair suggesting a whisper of Indian blood. They possessed a canvas-topped wagon, 2 mules, an ancient dog named Wolf, and that particular ambition that drives settlers toward horizons lined with dust and promise. But Walker carried a shadow within him. From childhood, he had harbored a phobia of snakes so profound it bordered on the pathological. Some said it stemmed from a prenatal influence. Others whispered of an old Indian squaw who had cursed him with prophecy of his end. Whatever the source, the mere mention of serpents drained the blood from his face, and the sight of even a harmless garter snake could trigger convulsions. This was the man who chose to settle in the rattlesnake country of the Washita River Basin north of where the village of Binger would one day stand, a place where the prairie rolled red and sandy, and the grass hid nests of the venomous things he feared most. They built their cabin in the spring when the wildflowers painted the prairie in deceptive colors. The structure rose slowly. Rough-hewn logs chinked with clay, a sod roof, a stone fireplace. Walker dug a root cellar, sweating in the cool air, while Audrey tended a small garden plot fenced against the wind. The dog Wolf, ancient and useless, slept in the sun. For a time it seemed they might escape the shadow. The land was rich, the soil dark and promising. But the cellar Walker dug went deep into earth that was not empty. It reached into the burrows where the rattlesnakes kept their eggs, the sacred nurseries of Yig's children. The first encounter came with the warming weather. Audrey descended to fetch potatoes and found the floor alive with writhing forms. She screamed, not from fear, but from the suddenness of it. Walker, hearing her cry, rushed to the cellar door, then froze at the top of the ladder. The sight below, the coiling, the triangular heads lifted in warning, triggered his affliction. He collapsed on the threshold, foaming at the mouth, his body rigid in a seizure that seemed to shake his very bones. Audrey had to climb over him, fetch his rifle, and return to shoot the serpents herself, her hands steady while her husband convulsed in the dust. She killed 7 that day, dragging their bodies out with a hoe and burning them in the yard. The smell of burning scales drifted across the prairie. Walker recovered slowly, his face gray, his hands trembling so badly he could not hold a cup. They did not speak of what had happened, but the silence between them grew heavy with unspoken dread. That night, Audrey dreamed of drumming, distant at first, then closer, a rhythm that seemed to pulse in her blood. She saw fires on the horizon, shapes dancing with serpentine motions, and above them all, a presence vast and scaly that regarded her with eyes like polished obsidian. Autumn arrived with a change in the air that went beyond temperature. The wind carried a different weight, and the sky seemed lower, pressing down upon the earth. Then the drumming began, first from the north, where the Wichita tribes kept their secrets, then from other directions, until the nights were alive with a ceaseless, rhythmic pounding that seemed to synchronize with the heartbeat of the land itself. The Davises' nearest neighbors, a family named Moore, who lived 3 miles east, came to warn them.
Old Major Moore, a veteran of the Indian campaigns, looked at the ground when he spoke of the autumn ceremonies.
"You must not kill the rattlers in autumn," Major Moore said, his voice barely audible above the distant drums. "Not in August, September, or October. That is when Yig is hungry. That is when he looks for those who have harmed his children." Walker wanted to believe it was superstition, but his fear gave the warning credence. Audrey, practical and hardened by months of protecting her husband, scoffed inwardly. She had killed a dozen serpents that summer. She would kill a dozen more if they threatened her home. She did not understand that the snake god's vengeance was not swift, but patient as cold stone. The debts were being tallied, the interest compounding in darkness. September brought a plague of serpents. They poured from the earth as if summoned, filling the cellar again despite the stones nesting in the walls, sunning themselves on the doorstep each morning. Walker took to his bed, paralyzed by the sight of them, while Audrey became a fury of destruction. She killed them with spade and fire, with boiling water and buckshot. She buried them in mass graves far from the house, but they returned. The dog Wolf was bitten and died, his body swollen and black. The mules grew skittish, their eyes rolling white. Still the tom-toms beat, night after night, a rhythm that seemed to say, "We know, we remember, the reckoning comes." The night of the equinox, Walker descended to the cellar despite his terror. He needed tools to repair the wagon, and Audrey was ill with fever. He took a lantern and a pistol Though the latter would be useless against his phobia, the darkness swallowed him. Audrey woke to screams. Not human screams, but the sound of a man trying to scream while his throat locked in convulsion. She grabbed the rifle and descended into the blackness. The lantern had shattered.
In the dim moonlight filtering through the root cellar window, she saw Walker on the floor, covered in a living blanket of rattlesnakes, his body already still, his gray eyes open and reflecting the moon.
Audrey fired until the rifle was empty, killing dozens, but they did not scatter. They held their ground, guarding Walker's body as if it were an offering. When the snakes finally retreated at dawn, slithering back into the earth through cracks that seemed to open just for them, Audrey dragged her husband's body upstairs. He was swollen with venom, his skin mottled with punctures. She buried him beneath a cottonwood tree, digging the grave herself, her hands bleeding. That night she slept alone in the cabin for the first time, and she felt the change begin. Not in her body yet, but in her soul, as if something had marked her for collection. The first physical change came 3 days later. She woke to find her hair falling out in clumps, black strands on the pillow that had been her pride. She touched her scalp and felt roughness, scales emerging like those of a serpent shedding its skin. She hid it beneath a bonnet, telling herself it was shock, grief, fever, but the scales spread, tawny and iridescent, across her shoulders and down her back. Her spine began to ache, then to restructure itself, the vertebrae elongating, pressing against her skin. She found she could no longer stand fully upright. The posture of humanity had become painful. She began to crawl, to slither, finding comfort in the dust. Her face altered last, as if Yig wished her to witness her own transformation in the mirror Walker had hung above the washstand. Her skull flattened, the bones shifting with audible grinding sounds. Her eyes, once dark and human, bulged and blackened, becoming shiny and opaque. The pupils, vertical slits. Her nose recessed. Her lips tightened against gums that bled as teeth loosened and fell away, replaced by something sharper. She tried to scream, but her throat had changed. The sound that emerged was a hiss, a dry, rattling exhalation that carried her despair in its timbre. She was no longer Audrey Davis. She was a vessel for Yig's eternal mockery. The neighbors found her a week later. When Major Moore came to check why the Davis smoke had ceased, they saw her through the window, naked, scaled, writhing on the straw mattress where she had dragged herself. They broke down the door with axes, prepared to kill a monster. But Dr. McNeil, then a younger man, new to the territory, intervened. He saw the humanity still flickering in those black eyes, the intelligence that understood its own damnation. He organized her capture with nets and poles, not bullets, and transported her to the asylum in Guthrie. She did not resist. She seemed to know that this was the completion of the curse. To live, to remember, to suffer without the release of death. In the asylum, they tried everything. Prayers, medicines, restraints. Nothing halted the progression. After 6 months, the transformation stabilized, if one could call it that. She became what I saw in the cellar. A thing of human size and roughly human outline, but scaled, flat-headed, limbless in function, though she retained arms and legs that she tucked against her body like vestigial memories. She ate raw meat, then lived rats, striking with a speed that blurred the eye. She hissed constantly, a sound that the attendants said carried words in its sibilants, prayers, curses, fragments of the Lord's Prayer learned in Arkansas childhood. She did not age. The decades passed, and she remained. Dr. McNeil's voice had grown hoarse. Outside, full night had fallen, and the violet sky had turned to black. She has outlived 3 attendants, he said. She will outlive me. The curse is eternal, because Yig is eternal. He is not a devil in the Christian sense, but a force, a representation of the serpent's place in the world, ancient when the plains were underwater. He spoke of Quetzalcoatl, of Kukulkan, of the feathered serpent gods of the south, all deriving from this older, darker prototype. Yig demanded only respect, but the punishment for disrespect was absolute. To become the thing you destroyed, to slither in the dust of your sin forever. I left the asylum that night with a fear that has never left me. Not the fear of snakes, though, that came later, irrational and overwhelming, but the fear of cosmic justice. We think we own the land that we can kill and build and claim without consequence, but there are older agreements, signed in blood before our species learned to walk upright. Yig is the guardian of those pacts. The tom-toms still beat in the autumn, though the white men do not hear them. The serpents still sun themselves on the rocks, counting the generations of men who will pass and be forgotten while they remain cold and patient, waiting for the next debtor to come due. I returned to my academic life, but the curse followed me in dreams. I saw Audrey's eyes, human and aware, staring from scaled sockets. I heard the hissing that might have been my name. I developed a phobia more profound than Walker's ironic punishment for a man who had sought knowledge. Now, when I see a garden snake, I freeze. When I hear the autumn wind, I think of drums. The asylum still stands. Dr. McNeil is long dead, but she remains in B116, ageless, waiting. And sometimes in the dark hours, I wonder if the transformation is contagious. If by looking upon her, I have signed my own name in Yig's ledger.